It's a real pleasure to be here to reflect on the important topics that Christian has already anticipated, actually. I will, only outline two possible areas out of many in which the notion of immateriality can be inflected or could be also inflected. Before doing that, I want to start with a counter movement from immateriality to materiality, which testifies to the extreme relevance of immateriality. As in the case of meat and similar eatables, the thought strikes us, this is the dead body of a fish, this of a fowl or pig. And again, that this Falernian is merely the juice of a grape cluster. And this purple-edged robe is just sheep's wool steeped in the blood of a shellfish. This passage from Marcus Aurelius' Meditations seems to be a good introduction to the theme of this conference and a good comment to what Christian has just said. Through the strategy of estrangement, Marcus questions common values, status symbols, symbolic meanings, by bringing highly praised delicacies, luxuries, and signs of power back to pure materiality, as in the case of refined food and wines and the imperial purple garment decorations. The obvious underlying implication is that every interaction we entertain with material things gains sense and meaning by virtue of the immaterial values these material things are capable to embody, and the different metaverses in which they are able to project us. If we think about museums, archaeological sites, landscapes, this might seem all too obvious, even if I deeply agree with what Christian said. The interaction between the material and the immaterial is always a negotiation that has to be discovered time by time. We know far too well, for example, that the pieces of fired water and clay that populate the vitrines of museums, or the innumerable pieces of bronze, silver, or gold shaped in various forms, pieces of organic remains or pieces of stone, are there also and mostly in their materiality, mainly because of their capacity to bridge our relationship with immaterial and now invisible practices, in which I include production, trade, values, lives, and memories. The fragment of a cleroterion, a device used in democratic Athens to randomize the allotment of political and juridical offices that you see on the right, is a kind of proxy done with a specific technology and material, but it's a proxy for us also of a material and at times highly symbolic values and complex practices, concrete practices, namely the ones of ancient democracy. And the same is true for the ancient portraits, tombs, wall paintings, landscapes, mosaics, inscriptions, and so on. The crucial challenge for museums seems to me to be the one of finding ways and strategies to convey to the viewers the complex relationship between the praxis in their technology, materiality, that is the material object, and the very many worlds often distributed on a quite long time span that they create, bridge, or point to. And I will touch upon two examples that, to my mind, might foster a reflection on the different dimensions in which the production of objects and images always implies a relationship with immaterialities, not only museums and not only for distant viewers like us, but also in the contemporary context in which these objects and images were produced. When I say objects and images, I give a lot of importance to the support, which has a weight, which has a material quality, which is part of the ancient experience, that is, of also the ancient, the metaverse that these objects are able to produce. The visual arts in particular seem to me to always have had the core function of creating and pointing to alternative, distant meta verses and establishing the bridges that enable the viewer to move and act within them. And these bridges are always material. The viewer can thus immerse in these metaverses and or give meaning to or project or justify his or her own experiences through the back and forth between the real material world and the virtual one created by the objects and images. Starting from this premise, a number of interesting issues can be investigated, such as, for example, the type of metaverse an image or group of images create, the specific rules that govern each image ecosystem, their tools the visual arts use to create such environments, and the type of interaction they foster and imply. And in this brief time, I'll try to contribute to the discussion on the topic of materialities by recalling two examples of interaction, specific examples, with the material worlds evoked by images and their support. We will see an example of levels of unreality and reflect briefly on the tools that the visual arts use to create them. I use tools because of its material dimension. And we will see an example of relationship between a viewer and the metaverse pointed to by an object. I find that the expression levels of unreality is a particularly effective one. And I borrow the expression from a very important yet not particularly successful book published in 1963 by Sven Sandström, who analyzes a context which is far away from my work, fresco painting from the last 2 decades of the 15th century. His selects cases which are explicitly based on the use of geometric perspective. But I start from this book because the type of question Sandström asks are, to my mind, extremely relevant in the context of our conference and can be applied well beyond the Renaissance fresco painting, namely to every image in the relationship with its support. In short, he attempts at analyzing the complex net of constraints, spaces of freedom, and spaces of violation of the rules in the genre he analyzes, as well as the tools and the devices available in that medium and genre to create alternative realities. Sandström first strategic move is to set up a method to distinguish the different levels of unreality in fresco painting. And in order to do so, he uses the example of Masaccio Trinità in Florence. I won't enter the analysis of the fresco and the tools used by Masaccio to create a metaverse in which different levels of unreality and time, God and the Holy Spirit, Christ, St. Mary and St. John, the two patrons, the contemporary Brunelleschian architecture, the memento mori on the lower part of the chapel, the space of the viewer, how these interact. It is enough to recall that already in 1568, Vasari was commenting on this marvelous creation of a virtual chapel shaped in the contemporary manner of Brunelleschi, contiguous and in dialogue with the real space of the church. we must notice that the different level of unreality and times created by Masaccio are rigidly separated. Through materiality, that is, the painted architectural elements and their colors, he makes God and the Holy Spirit to project and communicate with the human figures from the distant past of Christ's lifetime. So God and the Holy Spirit are in connection with the living human beings, St. John and St. Mary, at the side of the cross. This space inside the triumphal arch which is shaped as a contemporary human architecture, is rigidly separated from the patrons and the viewers' worlds. The space structure and an impassable step allow no contact between the two spheres. The space of the chapel where the two patrons kneels is framed by high pilasters, and as you can see, surmounted by capitals and upper entablature in red stone. This space belongs to the same level of unreality of the base in gray stone, where an altar is placed supported by little columns. Under the altar, a skeleton rests on a sarcophagus, half recessed in a niche, and with a famous inscription of Memento Mori: Io fu già, quel che voi siete, e quel chi son, voi anco sarete. I was what you are, and what I am is what you will be. It is interesting to notice that the overhang of the entablature and the podium on which the altar is placed constitute the bridges between the world of the present viewers and the world of the patron, so that the real space of the viewers is forced to be one with the unreal space where the patrons and the altar are located. At the same time, this contiguity raises the doubt only after experiencing this relationship of contiguity. It raises the doubt that the holy scene in the triumphal arch stays there itself as a painted object decorating the chapel, rather than as a real scene happening under our eyes. With Sandrum's questions in mind, I think we can reanalyze many other cases, not only from the Renaissance. I'm sure that every one of us would have many examples in mind. And just to limit myself to a couple of examples, we can ask what kind of material world is evoked, just to make really one small example, through the decoration of the atrium of the house of Sallustius, one of the few surviving examples of first Pompeian style decoration. First, second, third, and fourth are very contemporary classificatory ways to, that tell us a lot about chronology, but what are the immaterial worlds that this effort in even economic effort in decoration would want to evoke. What devices are used and what role materiality plays in, and what relationship is established between the painted space and the space in the room. The same questions can be asked, for example, in relation to the creation of unreal spaces which reference an entire system of immaterial values from a distant world, as for example through the material elements and markers of an Hellenistic palace, as in the atrium of Villa A in Oplontis. The constraints of time do not allow me to analyze a crucial point, namely the actual role of that materiality plays in the creation of these metaverses. We all know that this atrium of Villa A in Oplontis would reference all the system of regality, religion of an Hellenistic palace. But all this is done through devices and material materials and the evocation of specific materiality in an Hellenistic palace as imagined in first century AD. The Pompeian paintings represented gardens on another particularly interesting case from this point of view, especially when they are in a concrete, spatial, or visual relationship with real gardens. And you see that things are there, for example, the monsters, the centaurs. Some centaurs are living, they're painted. Some are there in these paintings as marble objects. And so they evoke completely different immaterial worlds. I would like to, I want to now enter into this. I change completely this scenario because I want to bring a second examples of a possible relationship between material objects and immateriality, focusing on the interaction of a possible viewer with a metaverse created by a specific object and its image. The scenario is completely different, namely the Greek symposium, in which small groups of males, of aristocratic males, met to drink together in a specifically designed room and according to a rigid system of rules. Among other things, they were physically interacting with the images decorating the cups they were drinking from. And you see on the slide one of these cups. The label in the museum tells the visitor that this is a cup whose tondo is decorated with a mythological scene, namely the scene of Zeus abducing the adolescent Ganymedes, with whom the god has fallen in love. But what is the relationship the users of this cup would establish with the metaverse in which the represented scene takes place? We see how carefully the painter has described Zeus' loss of control, the keraunos, the lightning, on the ground, and the abandoned scepter. But also, Zeus lost his control because of love, but he also respected the very rigid courting rules. He has given Ganymedes a cock, a typical courting gift that the boy holds in his left. Now, what do we convey to the visitor in the museum? That this is a mythological scene, again, a contemporary, classificatory perspective. A song improvised by an anonymous symposius, that is, by one of the users of cups like the one you see, gives us a precious hint on the possible relationship between the object, the represented scene, and the viewer. And there is pleasure in loving a boy, since once, in fact, even the son of Kronos, king of the immortals, fell in love with Ganymedes, seized him, carried him to Olympus, and made him divine, keeping the lovely bloom of boyhood. So don't be surprised, Simonides, that I too have been captivated by love for a handsome boy. The anonymous symposius then sang his love in front of his drinking companions. And in order to justify his total loss of control, he projects his human experience on the divine sphere by recalling the case of Zeus and Ganymedes. And losing control in the symposium was one of the worst things that could happen. We have tons of songs improvised by symposiums in which they recalled the need to keep control. And this also tells us that they lost control and that poetry was used to reaffirm the rule which was systematically violated. Such a possibility of projection might be triggered and bridged by images on objects like the one we see in this slide and the museum in Ferrara, objects that the symposiast physically manipulated, felt its weight, kept under their eyes. They saw them moving while they were drinking under the surface of wine. The preserved song we have read has a further important implication. This back and forth between the world of human experience and the distant metaverse of the divine world allows the anonymous symposiast in love, as well as his companions in the same situation. And we have a lot of these cups showing how a symposiast could court a young boy, a young boy. So they would allow to certainly justify their loss of control, but also to partake of the divine sphere and feel a bit, at least for a moment, like Zeus, like the king of the immortals. And I'm wondering how much and if it is worthwhile that in a museum we also point to these uses, which are not only external uses, but physical uses of objects, and the metaverses that this interaction between human experience, context, in this case the symposium, support and images were able to create. Thank you.